Today we start with the 25th verse. The title of that is, Let's Give Up the Sense of Division, which is born out of ignorance. It goes like this. Shatrau mitre putre bandho, makuru vigraha sandho, makuru vigraha sangho, sarvasmin napi pasyatmanam, sarvotra suja bhedadnya. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. Do not make an effort to create a strife with an enemy, Shatru, or build friendship with a friend, Pande, Bandhav, son or relative, Putre, Bandhav. Sarvasmin api Atmanam Pashyat. By seeing the self in everything and everywhere, Sarvatra, give up the sense of division born out of ignorance. Give up the sense of division which is born out of ignorance. Bhedadnyanam utruja. The message simply is, when we really recognize oneness, even the slight or even major disagreement, even the major discomfort that we suffer by those people around you, does not lead us to disown them. Let's look at some examples. Suppose we are eating, and during that eating process, by mistake, we bite our tongue. We got severe pain, we start bleeding. Knowing fully that the tongue belongs to us only, tooth belongs to us only, we don't get mad with the tooth and demand that tooth must be immediately pulled out, because we see the unity in both of them. For example, those who develop diabetes sometimes develop peripheral vascular disease and neuropathy, which leads to ulcerations, infections, and sometimes the infection becomes so serious, that the physician might suggest that maybe it needs amputation, needs to be taken out. Knowing fully that that's the correct advice, as a human being, because that foot belongs to us, we just don't want the surgeon to do that unless it was absolutely critical. So that attachment is there, despite the fact that food is causing a major problem for your survival. So what we are learning from this disciple's comment is that when we are upset with our friends, brothers, sisters, or even children, as parents we are, for whatever action they may undertake, we must always remember the oneness, part of the same family, and not get mad with them. Extend this further. Don't stop with the family alone. Go to our community, go to the city, go to the country, go for the entire world. So that's how you extend the unity. Like Sri Krishna says, like a thread of divinity runs through the entire Maniguna Eva, Vasudhaiva Kutumbaka. If you remember in Purusha Sukta, the entire society is compared to one human body from head to toe. It's important that that body has to work synchronously in harmony so that body can work properly. So too, the members of the society, each one of us performing different functions for the benefit of everybody, have to work in harmony and without any fighting at all. Then only the society can work smoothly. If you remember, there's so many scientists in this group. We call this cosmos in which we live. We don't call it chaos, because there is a mutual affinity of all the entities according to the science. There is a rhythm of mutual relationship in which the entire world is held together in one web of love. For a mother, it doesn't matter how dirty the child gets. The child is still dear. If you remember the naughty boy Sri Krishna, to his mother Yashoda, he was very dear. It doesn't matter how dirty he got. I don't know if you read cartoon series, I always do. The first thing I read in the newspaper. Dennis the Menace is always making mess. The parents still love him dearly, as every parent does for their child. Doesn't matter how dirty they are. Once we come to comprehend that the same single eternal source of divinity is expressed through all the entities in this creation, with varying names and form, rupa, nama, we automatically change our attitude, and thus the vision towards the entire creation becomes unified. And I think we have to extend that, not just the living beings, entire environment as well. If you remember, our Hindu community in 2006 had a painful experience where our temple was desecrated. But when these two youngsters were arrested, we were able to differentiate between actor and the action. The actor, the thread of divinity that is common in each one of us, we could see in them. The action was unacceptable. So we wanted to make sure that they were not put in the jail with 3 felonies each and ruin their entire life. But we wanted to forgive them, give them a chance to expunge the records by give them an opportunity to work performing community service in their own temple. This is based on a simple principle of Kshama. And Kshama is an act, and Kshanti is an attitude. Now, Kshama both arise from the same Sanskrit word. I love Sanskrit, so it comes from the root Ksham and can be generally translated as patience, endurance, forbearance, or forgiveness. Unfortunately, when we compare Kshama with forgiveness, forgiveness implies holier than thou attitude that stems from pride. The true meaning of Kshama or Kshanti, however, is much more simply than forgiveness. It implies remaining serene, patient, and observing self-restraint under all circumstances, treating everyone with love and compassion, even to those who harm you. That's the important thing to recognize. You recognize that even those vandals carry the same thread of divinity that each and every one of us carries. Even Ishavasya Upanishad says the same thing. Once we see the same thread of divinity, our delusion is gone, and we see oneness, and we don't experience any sorrows. Tatra kaha moha, kaha shoka, ekam anupashyataha is the 7th verse from Ishavasya Upanishad. So basically, what we learn is give up the sense of division, which is born out of ignorance. That was the message that the disciple of Sri Shankaracharya learned and is sharing with all of us. The next verse, the subject matter is better conquer the inner enemies, otherwise you're in deep trouble. It goes like this: Kamam krodham lobham moham tyaktvatmanam pashyati soham atmatjnana vihina moodaha te pachyante naraka nigudaha. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. That means having given up lust, anger, greed, and delusion, tyaktva, kamam, krodham, lobham, and moham, the seeker sees the self, he, I am, saha aham atmanam pashyati. Unfortunately, those who are devoid of this knowledge, atmat jnana vihinaha mudaha, are fools. They unfortunately are tortured as captives in hell. Te pachyante naraka nigudaha. Now remember, kama or desire is essential. Without the desire, you cannot get any work done. So Sri Krishna said, kama is fine. But what he is referring to here is a never-ending desire, trishna, craving. And from that trishna and that desire, the lust or passion that arises, in that feeling, we lose ourselves and come under its sway. And that tremendous force that comes out of it, we lose all our control and lose a moral compass and act irrationally. That is kama is referring to. Krodha is anger, yet another impulse which can get out of control. And once it takes control of our mind, thinking, one may act irrationally and often unethically and immorally. And again, losing the control of your mind and getting angry and losing the judgment, we can act inappropriately. So, kamam krodham. Lobh is, of course, basic income is necessary to survive, but greed is unacceptable. And delusion, misunderstanding, not knowing correctly, is a problem itself. As a matter of fact, if you remember in the 16th chapter, on the 21st verse, Shri Krishna says, in connecting the naraka I'm talking about, Trividam narakasya edam dwaram nashana atmana. Nashanam atmana. Trividam narakasya edam dwaram. What are those three doors? Kamaha, krodha, tatha lobha. And so he advises tasmat etat trayam traje. So kindly give up these three. Don't go into those doors at all and prevent yourself from going into the hell. So these are three gateways to hell. That's what he's referring to. The seeker is able to gain understanding of one's true identity only when he is able to overcome the demons that pervade us. What are the demons? Lust, anger, greed, and delusion, misunderstanding, moha. And if we are able to give up or overcome these obstacles, these hurtful tendencies, we are able to maintain the balance of the mind, allowing us to understand that he indeed is that Brahman. In any akar form you like, such as Vishnu, Shiva, Ganesha, Devi, or any of one of the favorite Ishtadevas. And the individuals who have no true understanding of their true divine nature suffer from ups and downs, high beta, of samsara, with its never-ending cycles of births and deaths. And they're always questioning, who am I? Kaha aham koham. And then their life ends up full of never-ending cycles of desires, subsequent frustrations, resultant anger, and then when greed is not satisfied, complete misapprehension as to what the life is about and lifetime suffering for that individual. For example, if you remember the second chapter, Dhyayato Vishayan Pusa, Sangasteshu Pajayate, Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha, Kamat Krodho Bijayate, Krodhat Dhavati Sammoha, Sammohat Smruti Vibrama, Smruti Bhraushat Buddhinasho, Buddhinashat Pranashat. It starts with unending desire, that is Trishna, that urge that takes you to the death, destruction. Again, it's amazing how many times various scholars have said exactly the same thing. Shankaracharya says in other comment, Kama krodhascha lobhascha sarve tishtanti taskaraha tasmat jagrata jagrata. Desire, anger, and greed are the taskaras, the looters that stand within the body, ready to plunder absolute knowledge gem, Atma Jnanam. So better watch out. Jagrata, Jagrata. We finished 2 verses so far. And the final verse is the coming up, which talks about Srimati has written it. He starts summarizing what his teacher has taught him to do as a daily practice in order to gain the knowledge. He says, Geyam Gita Nama Sahasram, Dhyeyam Shripati Rupa Satram, Neyam Sajjana Sange Chittam, Deyam Dina Janaya Chittam. He said, Geyam Gita Nama, Bhagavad Gita should be sung. Sahasram, Nama Sahasram, Geyam, that means sing the Sahasranama, should be chanted. Dhyeyam Shripati Rupam Jasram, that means the form of Narayana should be constantly meditated upon. Ajasram, constantly should be meditated upon. The mind should be led towards the company of good. Neyam Sajjana Sange Chittam. And wealth should be distributed to the needy. Deyam Dina Janaya Chittam. So these are the last verse, as I mentioned, from the 14 verses of Chaturdasha Manjarika Stotra. And what he's advising here, he learned from the teacher that we should study Gita. That's my favorite scripture. There are luckily only 700 verses consisting of 18 chapters. So what I would suggest that we should sing at least one chapter every day. And if time permits, the entire Gita, and I would suggest at least once a year, we should do that. And that ideal day for this year will be on 25th of December, because that's the day is a Moksha Ekadashi. The same day happens to be Christmas, but this year is going to be Moksha Ekadashi the same day. The same day then the Gita was sung by Sri Krishna to his disciple Arjuna on the battlefield. So that will be a good day to sing the entire Gita. And if you cannot read the entire chapter, at least read a few verses or listen to the discourses of Gita available on video or audio. Ideal thing is to meet in person, so that, like we're meeting today, where you can ask questions and get some clarification on subtle confusion that one may have. And Gita is great because Yoga Shastra and Brahma Vidya, it outlines the vision of life, Brahma Vidya, and also details the methodology, Yoga Shastra. So it teaches us the discriminative understanding or Viveka as we gain both the Brahma Vidya, what is Brahman, and tells us how we prepare ourselves to get ready to gain that knowledge. That's about singing the Gita regularly. Second advice that he said he learned from his teacher was Nama Sahasram Geyam. That means you should be chanting the names of Lord Vishnu 1,000 times. Now, when I say Vishnu, because this is in context of this particular scripture, but you can pick up any Ishta Devata. Vishnu, Ram, Shiva, mine is favorite Ganesha. Any of those you can pick up and sing. Why? Reciting the name over and over again with immense devotion, it does affect our mind. For example, if you go outside in protesting and protest in a violent terms, indeed you develop violence in your mind and your behavior and activities. If you keep on chanting Om Shanti, 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 peace, 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 trust me, you do indeed become peaceful. It has been stated in this Kali Yuga, but the people of impure mind who live upon the wealth earned through unfair means, devoid of religious rights and good conduct, the only refuge is the name of Hari. Now, I'm not making it up, I'm just translating the meaning of Kalau, that means Kali Yuga. Kalmasha Chittanam, people with impure mind, Kalmasha Chittanam. Papa Drobya Upajivinam, those live upon the wealth earned through unfair means. Vizikriya Vihinanam, that means who do not perform any religious rites. And of course, they don't perform any good activities either. Only thing which doctor would recommend is Harena Nama Eva Kevalam. I would prescribe only Hari. Keep on singing the name of Hari. The next one is basically Dheyam Shripati Rupam Ajasram. That means Dheyam is meditate upon the form of the Lord, and Ajasram, that means constantly. Meditate constantly and regularly upon the form of the chosen Ishtadevata, Narayana, Rama, Shiva, Dakshinamurti, or my favorite is Ganesha. And when Shripati, you say the word, it carries with it all the attributes of Bhagwan. And those attributes are Yasha, success, Shri, all kind of wealth, that means both material as well as spiritual, Vairagya, Vairagya means if you know that you have everything, what else you need? So in that sense, you don't desire anything, don't need anything. Aishwarya, that means overlordship. Jnana is knowledge, that is as to who you are. Shaurya, the bravery, because in life you always face challenges, so should have the bravery to face the challenges and overcome them. And finally, virya, some people use it dharma, capacity to create that power, the strength, and righteously dharma. Such meditation invokes deep devotion in our hearts. Initially, our mind dwells on the physical form, but later on, one slowly starts dwelling upon what the chosen deity represents. We have discussed Ganpati Upanishad in these sessions. So initially, I got two original paintings of Ganesha where I do the prayers. Initially, it becomes a prayer meditation fixed on the Sakar Roop that my friend Sham Joshi painted in Mumbai for me. And gradually, when you get deeper and deeper in meditation, it disappears and gets into a form of Nirakara. Basically, if you remember the first few 5 verses of Ganpati Upanishad are basically Nirakara Rupa, and subsequently the next 3, 4 are describing what Ganesha is in the Akar form. So basically you are Deyam Shripati Rupam Ajasram, any of the deity that you prefer. Then Neyam Sajjana Sange Chittam. The mind should be led to the company of the good. That means you should be automatically attracted towards the people who are enlightened. When you are in the company of good people, ethical people who are enlightened, positive vibrations from those individuals are coming out from these people all the time. Even if you don't want those positive vibrations, they'll still stick to you. For example, if you go in a garden where there are fragrant flowers, Even if you have not plucked any of the flowers to bring it with you, you should not anyway. But when you walk in the house, the fragrance has already come with you. I mean, when you go to visit enlightenment, we call darshan, or when we go to the temple, we take darshan. Darshan is basically the vibrations, good vibrations of love, caring, is always emitting from such wonderful people. So spending the time with these people is important. Neyam, better go to Sajjana Sanghe. Mind should really drive you towards meeting those and staying in their company. And finally, Deyam Dina Janaya Chachit. Develop the attitude of charity, attitude, Chittam. Serve the people who are truly in need, who may be needed in food, clothing, shelter. And this should be done with a sense of sincerity and humility. The thing is, when you're offering something to somebody who really needs, never make that person humiliated. Consider this as a privilege that God has bestowed upon you, that you can help somebody. To help somebody without he or she realizing that he is being helped and showing mutual respect and love, that's the perfect way of giving the charity. Again, if you love somebody really, that automatically comes about. And again, when you're talking about charity, it's not only in the form of money. Even serving the people also is a charity. Doing volunteer work also is a charity. Saying sweet words, pleasing words to a person who is in pain and needs comfort also is a charity. And remember, when we are serving the other people, we're really serving the Lord itself. If you remember, Anant will remember the 13th chapter, the third verse says, Kshetradyam chapi mam viddhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. That means, Arjuna, may you know me as the knower of the body of all the bodies. So when you are helping the janata, all the general people, what you are doing is serving the God itself. So when Kumud and myself actively practiced medicine, when the patients came or the parents who were worried and concerned came along, for us, serving them was serving God itself. But that's the way we enjoyed our work, even though we had a chance to work for many long hours. But we enjoyed it. It was a privilege. I think we have to extend it from close personal friends, family, and extend it to the global level. But this should extend not only for human beings, animals, and of course, the plant kingdom. And that is where we should extend it to the environment as well. That's what we need to do as human beings. That concludes the 14 verses that the bright disciples of Shankara shared with us. Now starts 4 verses that Sri Shankara said. I plan to discuss only 2 this morning, where he tells what not to do. And the final 2 are basically advice what to do, which I'll include in the summary session next time. So this is the last but one. On 13th will be the last session for Bhaja Govindam. He says in this, the title I would call it as Man, unfortunately, does not give up the sinful behavior. That's what he said. He's really frustrated, Shankaracharya. He said, Sukata kriyate rama bhoga, paschat danta sharire roga, yadyapi loke maranam sharanam, tadapine munchati papa charanam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. Sukataha kriyate rama bhoga. Very readily, one indulges in carnal pleasures. Paschat danta sharire roga. Thereafter, alas, there come the diseases of the body. Yadyapi loke maranam sharanam, tadapi papacharanam na munchati. Even though in the world the ultimate end is death, man does not give up his sinful behavior. Unfortunately, many human beings miss the rare opportunity of this human birth, remain engrossed in sense gratifications and enjoying other material pleasures such as eat, drink, and marry to the very end, just as the small worms you can see in the rotten fruits. I don't know with how many people, there's a called umber is a tree that I grew up in tropics, and if you open up some of these rotting fruits that come out from it, you see nothing but small, I don't want to describe it, they're terrible things to see also. Of course, they are very happy. Ultimately, after meeting the death, we will go through multiple birth cycles, and not necessarily human life right off the bat, going through various species before being blessed again to be born again as human beings. Because Durlabham Trayamaya Vedat Deva Anugraha Hetukam Manushyatvam Mumukshatvam Mahapurusha Samshya. So there's divine grace that we basically get the human life. Here, Shankaracharya is crying of frustration, wondering as to how any human being, given this rare, unique human form, with that precious gift of free will, does not recognize what is the most important thing in human life. How does he ever think about indulging in self-gratification, knowing fully that it's sure to come to the end in the form of a death and not completing the mission of the human life? Because I said that grace comes rarely. We are born as human beings, but we have to develop that mumukshutvam, desire to be free from bondage, free from any limitations, and seek and fortunately receive the company of enlightenment. If you remember, we discussed earlier, we have very common traits with animals. But intellect is something which is unique for the human beings. It's ahara nidra bhayamaithunam cha samanya etat pashubhir narana. There are several features which are common to human beings and animals. Hunger, sleep, fear, and sense gratification. Ahara, nidra, bhaya, maithunam. Buddhi tesham adhiko vishesho. That's the only thing which is unique. Buddhya vihina pashubhi samana. The intellect is the only distinguishing feature. Buddhi tesham vishesho adhiko. And those who are devoid of intellect, the human beings are same as animals. As a matter of fact, you'll remember that it's a Subhashita. Some other versions I've used instead of buddhi, they have replaced with dharmoi tesham adhiko vishaya, righteousness. So we have to, as householders, we must use our intellect, our conscience, and lead our married life and live with righteousness according to the social conduct that is established in our society. If you remember, there are two lifestyles. Lokesmin divita deshta pura prokta mayanaga jnana yogena sankhyanam karma yogena yogina. That means you can be renunciate or you could be a married person. But when we get married, during the marriage ceremony, we take important vows. And those vows basically is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha, artham, aham vivaha samskaram karishye. That means live by righteous means, create security circle around us and our friends and family, and earning livelihood to sustain ourselves. But it better be done righteously by dharma. Enjoy the life as a married person, kama, but never forget the fourth one, which is moksha, the ultimate human purushartha, that is moksha. Moksha, as Professor Rambachan has beautifully taught us earlier, is a liberation from any sense of liberation by gaining the knowledge of our true identity, which is nothing but awareness, chit, which always exists, and thus immortal, sat, and is limitless, ananta, and of course, overflowing with happiness and contentment, ananda, satchidananda. In order to accomplish that goal, one needs an intense desire to pursue. That is mumukshatam. Unless you have that intense desire, we languish in material pleasures and never find enough time to pursue this important goal. For that, you have to be fortunate enough to prepare yourself by regular prayers, as we do, or getting together in the discussion session that we do at the temple and the community. And then you'll be surprised that the teacher will appear in front of you without you realizing. One doesn't find a teacher. Dhanavajam putrad api bhiti. To the rich, that is dhanavajam, there is fear even from his own son. Sarvatra esha vitariti. This is the ordained way of wealth everywhere. So better watch out. What is amazing is whatever he taught 1200 years ago, very thoughtful, provocative, and truthful, even now in the 21st century. What he's saying is artha is anartha. Worth is a calamity. Wealth creates problem every step of the way. For example, it says, arthasya tadane siddhe utkarshe rakshane vaye. That means there is exertion, fear, anxiety, and delusion while acquiring. Arthasya sadhane, siddhe, utkarshe, rakshane, and vyaye. That's a problem. There's a fear, anxiety, delusion while acquiring. And acquiring is also this utkarshe, that means multiplying, acquiring, multiplying, protecting, and spending. Vyaye. Nasha upabhoga, ayasa, chinta, brahmonurana. That means wealth creates problem every step of the way. Now, wealth comes only after one sweats and toils for a very long time, exertion. Once it's acquired, one is afraid because you might lose and get anxious, chinta, about protecting it. And one is never satisfied with what we acquired, and hence the greed crops up. If you remember, one who was 100, shato, sahasro, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 1 million, and so on. And then what happens, there is a tendency to compare their own worth with others. And if perceived, doesn't matter if it's true or not, somebody has got more than you, one gets unhappy and gets jealous. So every step of the way, right, from working hard to earn, money causes problem. Anxiety to protect it, distinct fear of bodily harm from body, so-called friends, even family members. Even the youngsters are sometimes just waiting for the old man to die, waiting to inherit a great fortune. And I don't need to remind you that in our history, we have noted quite a few children who ascended to the throne by murdering their siblings and fathers. Aurangzeb is a perfect example in the Mughal dynasty. Now, it is appropriate to gain adequate wealth to take care of one's basic needs, such as shelter, nutrition, adequate clothing. One must also provide adequate resources towards the fulfillment of one's prescribed duties, but that's all that we need. That's why we are always taught we should work hard for our livelihood, share your good fortune with all individuals around you, especially those who are in need. And thus, as a matter if you remember, in Ishavasya Upanishad, Tena tyaktena bhunjita magruda kasyasvit dhanam. That means earn and live based on your hard work. After having earned, make sure that you share with other people. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. Then whatever remains in the prasad buddha. I'll conclude with a story where how wealth in some form or the other can cause more problem than you can handle. It's a story of a vulture who comes up with a sudden unexpected find of a large meaty prey, and then picked up the whole thing in his beak and started flying away, hoping to settle down at one quiet place to eat it all. But all the way as he was flying, other vultures were attacking him and attacking that piece of meat. And only way he found the peace when he left the entire piece of meat away, and then nobody chased him. The key is, if you get swayed by the wealth in whatever form it is, then it causes problem. So wealth causes artha is anartha. That was the comment that Shankaracharya made in his second verse as he was advising his students, and for that matter, us. Let's stop right at this stage and ask basically for any questions or comments from the friends. Thank you.
Said it all very well. I think your comment about wealth, it's okay to pursue wealth, to take care of yourself and those who are in need. That's, we should keep that in mind all the time. If you don't, we're kind of running a race where there is no goalpost, constantly looking, and it does cause anxiety. And so moderation is what you're commenting on.
Right.
In everything that we do.
I would like to share an experience I had yesterday that ties directly to your early story about vandalism at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
I was out in our local nature preserve yesterday, walking and photographing, and I stopped to talk with a couple of the naturalists who were on the trail. And the conversation got personal, and I ended up the story of my wife's death 1 year back, when she was struck by a car whose driver was momentarily inattentive. Instead of pursuing any kind of court action, we went the route of restorative justice. And restorative justice is very much like what you did with the two teenagers at the temple, except it's a bit formalized. And it's actually a part of the court system here in Minnesota. And when I finished my little story, one of those two naturalists responded immediately and said, well, you know, the Hindu temple here did something just like that. So today, right, how many years afterwards, the actions of the temple are still echoing in the community.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'll respond to that first and then answer your question that you asked last time afterwards. As a matter of fact, this happened in 2006 when the key players who were in that case, all of them were blessed by the temple. The prosecuting attorney was Amy Klobuchar. Now she's a senior senator from Minnesota. The judge was Kevin Burke, who became a chief judge. He's the one who he, along with Amy Klobuchar, started restorative justice the first time. He became the chief judge and retired, did show up in our temple in 2016 for a function. Peter Cale was the prosecuting attorney on that case. He's presently the chief judge of Hennepin County. And those students, 18 and 19-year-old, who were tried in the court by Amy Klobuchar and were convicted of 3 felonies each, were requested by us, our community, to be forgiven if and get a chance to expunge their records after 5 years by proper behavior and performing community service at our temple. So they came and worked at the temple. They came to realize what the values of Hindu temple are, or Hindus are. They were welcomed with open arms. They had lunch every Sunday when they came, did work at the temple. Now, one of them is married with 3 kids. Both of them are gainfully employed, completely educated in their respective fields. And they're productive citizens instead of being hardened criminals in the justice system. So the thing is, that is the way to look at it. They need punishment because action is inappropriate. But you have to recognize the same thread of divinity runs to them, through them, as it runs through each one of us. So that is the detailed story if you want to hear about it. Other part about it is that you asked me the question about free will after you get enlightened last time. Yes, I mentioned, yes, there's a free will, but what happens is the same as divine. So you spontaneously act in exactly the same fashion. So you feel it's a free will, but it's no different than what divine activity would be, okay?
Namaste. The only question I might ask is, you mentioned you like Sanskrit. and I was just wondering, is there a difference between samsara and samskara with a K? I was
Yes.
just wondering about that.
Yes, samsara is your life cycle that you go through. Samskaras are basically rites of passages. So you have a birthright, naming ceremony, food prashadam, sacred thread ceremony, marriage ceremony, and final rites. I mean, there are 16 major sanskaras that go through. That is samskara, rites, a passage.
Okay.
And samsara is the life cycle. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Sure.
I really like this definition of charity
Uh-huh.
that you mentioned. It is not just to help somebody, not even to help somebody in a selfless fashion, but to help somebody without their even realizing that they are being helped.
Yeah, that's important. The thing is, if you feel that you're being helped in a very disrespectful way, it is hurtful.
Yeah. That means
Exactly. The thing is, for example, I'll tell you a story. I had a chance to visit my grandfather's place where he was practicing medicine. And he was a general practitioner in Murud, near on the coast of India, on south of Bombay. And I had gone there for 15 years after he was gone, no longer alive. The people would come out in the morning when I would come back from my walk, asking whether I was Dr. Sane's grandson. And when I went inside the house, because they invited me, asked about what I was doing, what I was headed towards, and then for the next half an hour, they'll talk nothing about that grandfather of mine. And what they would remind us is that if he saw the poverty in the house, they were housefalls at that time, Anand, he would quietly leave the money in the house without they even recognizing it. You understand what I mean? So that is the way you have to do in such a way where they don't even realize that you're doing it, but they recognize that you are intelligent enough to recognize the need and just make sure that they're being helped. So it's important. So that's the way charity really is, without telling them, letting them know. Okay, thanks, sir. Anant, you want to wrap it up?
Just to add a few thoughts, Shashi, to the rich discussion that you already provided. I'm always, whenever I'm reading these texts and meditating on these texts, I'm always asking myself, how do they speak to us in our own times, in our own context? What can we retrieve from these texts to address, the challenges of our times? And I think there is so much here, just developing some of your lines of thought. So I was thinking of the first verse where you started, Shatrao mitre putre bandhau ma kuru yatnam vigra sandau sarvasman api pashyat bhatmam sarvatra sarvatro srija bhera jnanam. Thinking of a verse like this, Shashi, in the context of, again, or US context, because Rishi will be thinking from the Caribbean context, but thinking of how divided we are in these times here in the United States.
Oh my God, yes.
Politically. And I think that here a verse like this offers us some way forward, not of course to completely remedy the fractures of our society, but offers us an insight that I regard as particularly helpful, which is that even when we disagree with others, this verse says, Sarvasman napi pashyat atman, seeing oneself in the other, overcoming the divisiveness of self and other by seeing oneself in the other. And I think that, one can disagree, but disagreements tend to be or can be much less divisive if one also sees oneself in the other, the one with whom one disagrees. It is when one is feels fully, totally alienated from the other, that divisiveness tends to, to lead to violence or to hate. But I think the insight here is that we can disagree without necessarily being divisive in our disagreements, and we do that by seeing what we share with the other, by seeing ourselves, however we might wish to identify that common ground, maybe simply, discovering our common humanity. Of course, here in this text, the teachers are speaking about a much more fundamental identity with the other, that I think forms a basis for meaningful political and social engagement, not simply at the religious level, but even at the political and social level. But what we see here in our own society is that disagreement has become so hostile. We describe ourselves as so entirely different from the other that we see no common ground. And I think, there is relevance in a place like this for indicating how we can disagree. And we don't have to agree. We can't always agree on everything, but we can disagree without being disagreeable. I think that's something that I want to take from this verse where you started. I think also, Shashi, and you just adding a structure to what you've so beautifully described in the verse, Geyam Gita Nama Sahasram Geyam Sripati Rupamajasram. And here I see, the teachers really offering us a very beautiful structure for spiritual life, addressing, as you said, all of the components. So the first line, Geyam Gita Nama Sahasram, study the life of the man.
Exactly.
The spiritual life is not divorced from the life of the mind. So study, the use of the intellect, is an important component of that rationality, which all of it, I would say, is included in study. But also Dhyayam Sripati Rupamajasram, which is cultivating the heart through prayer. Here he's speaking about, so one is study, the other one is prayer, meditation, the development of the mind as well as the heart. Both have to be cultivated. And then the last two lines, I think remind us that as human beings, the spiritual life is, of course, not a life that is pursued in isolation, because we are social beings. And he speaks about neyam sajjana sangam chittam, so that, you know, we exist in a context of relationships, we live relationally, and therefore, as we part of our own religious and spiritual growth is because of the many ways in which we are blessed by the lives of others, which is the satsang idea. We are enriched by relationships with others in our community, and because of that, and the last line, you know, we should also be generous. We receive when we give. In relational context, we must be humble receivers and we must be generous givers. Deyam dina janaya chittam. But I was thinking in a special way about the last line, you know, deyam, or, you know, danam, because, you know, I think when we think about these words, these ancient words today, like danam or gift giving or generosity, we do have to amplify our understanding of these terms, especially in relation to what we are learning so much about structural poverty, structural injustice. So it is not simply the giving out of charity to others, but looking at the fundamental structures. That's also a way of being generous, trying to analyze fundamental structures that keep people in poverty, that keep people from having opportunities for flourishing and sustainable life. So that I think we have to expand the meaning of dhanam today to sort of bring into our consciousness the whole idea of structural injustice. And my final comment, Shashi, is on the, I think it's the last verse you did, artham anartham bhavaya nitya. You know, a lot of the, and Prasanna made the comment already about moderation. I think that, you know, there's been a lot of interesting studies on wealth and its significance in human life. And one of the recent studies mentioned that after, here in the United States, after one attains a salary of about $75,000 annually, statistically, that wealth doesn't really add anything to one's happiness. So this study sort of put a ceiling beyond, you know, one's life is not really enhanced in any significant way by accumulating more wealth. But I think the point there is also that we who might have, you know, wealth in a certain measure of comfort, we have to be very careful that we don't denigrate wealth itself, because there are many who lack even the most basic wealth that they need for their own well-being. We can say, well, artham and artham, you know, wealth is really not wealth when one has wealth.
Yeah.
When one enjoys wealth, but for those who don't, artham is artham. Artha is artha. It is not anartha. I think also my last comment in this verse, putra rapi dhana bhajam bhiti.
Yeah.
Perhaps we are seeing here, Shashi, a certain renunciance, negativization of family life. Not every family or not every person with, you know, who comes from a well-off family, you know, fears his or her children, treat the children only as interested in wealth. I think that's a rather cynical way to think about. You know, every wealthy person is afraid of his or her child, thinking that the child's interest only is in wealth, and we know that that's not true. We know that that's not the reality of so many, and perhaps even reality of most families. Of course, if you are really possessive about wealth and you know, consumed by greed, you suspect everyone.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe that's the point there. But I think there are many healthy families where children also appreciate, you know, the relationships with parents, and that these relationships are not seen like only through the lens of inheritance, and so on. So that's all, Shashi. Thank you very much for, again, excellent discussion on a very beautiful composition by Shankara.
I appreciate your comments and joining the discussion, because it's so much different when everybody looks at it from a different point of view. And I think it's important to remember that charity is not simply in the form of money, giving the time, support system, words of advice, counsel. Those are all, that's all basically charity too. So
absolutely. And you made that point very well. That's very important.
Yeah, can I go back for a second?
For sure.
This question of free will.
Yeah.
That seemed to say that free will is an illusion, and that God, that everything that is going to happen is preordained. That's how I interpret the answer, and that has been a sort of seems to me a doctrinal position of Hinduism, and at least some part of Hinduism. There is that famous song, Paradhina Ahe Jagati Putra Manavasa. And it puts a very helpless interpretation on this subject, that there is nothing that is in quote unquote our hands. And the whole idea of jurisprudence comes into play. Why are people being punished for what they do if that was going to happen anyway, and so on and so forth. So would it not be better to find a different answer than saying that everything is deterministically preordained?
I hear what you're saying, Anand, but just a minor modification. If you make it as I'm suggesting, you'll be able to see the clarity in that thinking. Our present life that we are born under is related to all our past actions, and that is called sanchita karma. And prarabdha karma is the particular arrow that you have taken out from the quiver to have this particular birth with a specific mission and goal and hopes that you come up with. But again, after you're born, you have the free will where you can use that God-given will of knowledge, buddhi, to reach and complete the goals and complete the mission. You can manushyatam comes after a long time. But then the next thing to remember is mukshutvam, where you are able to get rid of all the sanchita karma by reaching the stage of mumukshutvam. And once that is done, so even though that was not part of the initial part of it, but that intellect that you gain allows you to be free of limitations. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that is something which is not preordained. It depends on what you do in this life. As we were talking about, do the prayers, do the reading, study, take the advice from the people who have a little more experience. Should be willing to learn with humility and honesty and truthfulness and work hard for it. Then that allows you to get, with God's grace, a particular teacher who will appear in front of you, who will take you to even further level of enlightenment and total freedom. So you have come here with part of the karma, but what you do with the God-given opportunity of being a human being of free will allows you to complete your mission. For example, even the people in the heaven are unable to reach that stage. They have to come back in the mortal world. Kshine punyam martya lokam vishanti. They have to come back to the human form, then only they have a chance of being enlightened. So everything is not prarabdha. Prarabdha produces this birth, but what is done in this life is entirely up to us, based upon our intellect that we use with the free will. I don't know if making myself clear or confusing you, Anand.
Could I summarize it this way, because I think this is important to me, that the destiny, our destiny in this life, in other words, whatever comes our way,
Mm.
Somebody has an accident, whatever comes our way is preordained, is a result of our past karma.
Mhm.
But how we deal with it, what I would
Mhm.
call self-effort,
Mhm.
is not preordained.
Correct. That comes from free will.
Even God doesn't know what's going to happen,
Exactly.
right?
He's looking at you very carefully. He's interested in looking at you.
He's looking into it. He's a silent observer to it.
Exactly.
But the
Mhm.
Sakshi, right?
Sakshi, but the self-effort is in fact what is free will.
Yep, exactly.
Right. So what we are saying then is that there is free will.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Can I add something? I just want to add one point to this very good discussion. But I agree entirely that part of our free will is how we respond, as Anand is saying, to what comes our way. But I would like to say also, Anand, that I think part of our free will is not simply or only in the choice we make in our responses to what life presents us, or what life gives us, or as you're suggesting, what is ordained for us in life. But I think also that part of free will is also making entirely new choices in life. Not simply responding to the past, but also making free choices in this life. And I think that is what, Shashi in his answer quite rightly talked about the different kinds of karma. The three, Shashi, the three types that you mentioned, Sanchita, Prarabdha. The one that we don't speak sufficiently about is
Kriyamana.
Agami or Kriyamana karma, which would include all of the new choices we are making.
Yeah.
Even as we are dealing with the past and how the past has shaped us, the tradition has recognized this whole realm of in Sanskrit, Agami or Kriyamana karma, which will be free will choices in this life. Here and now. So I think that adds something to the what would be the realm of free will that human beings enjoy under that. So I just wanted to add that. I always like, Shashi Ramana Maharishi used a very beautiful example once to his disciples on this point, and he said, he asked them a question, he says, why don't you knock your teeth out when they bite your tongue?
Right.
Why don't you knock them out every time they bite your tongue? And you're saying, because you see them as part of you.
Yep.
They are your teeth. There is, he's just pointing again to what your point, that common identity. Of course, more deeply is that it's a question of avidya also. They're not intentionally malevolent.
Yeah, that's true.
It's an excellent example that he gives.
But if somebody else bites you, you'll have to think about something else.
Then then the response is to try to knock them out. Yes.
Yeah.
Then you use Kshama.
Oh, yeah. I'm just teasing, but
Yeah.
well, thanks again, everybody.